And sort of the underlying theme that we see God doing in our church body throughout this whole year, this whole school year, is encompassed by this little phrase, drawing close to God. Drawing close to God. That's the big picture of what we see him doing. It's been the underlying theme of every message we've had this entire fall. It's the theme behind even this series, the purpose and what we see God doing. And this morning, we're actually going to continue a series we've been going through on the book of Ruth. We're going to be in chapter 3 this morning. So if you want to, if you have a Bible with you, you can start turning there in anticipation. But as we think about this book of Ruth, at first glance, reading through the Old Testament, the book of Ruth sort of seems like just a blip, small little blip on the radar. I mean, on one side of the book of Ruth, right before it, you have the book of Judges, this huge book. And on the other side of it, you have 1st and 2nd Samuel, and it's like Paul, or it's Saul, and King David, and all these great things. And then wedged in between, you have this little tiny 4-chapter book called Ruth. And in all honesty, we can start to wonder why the book of Ruth is even there. Why was this lady's story so meaningful? Ruth is not even a Jewish background name, right? This is a Moabite lady. This is a lady from a different territory. How did she make it into the Bible and be remembered for thousands of years, studied? And I'm sure from reading through the book of Ruth, you almost get this impression from Ruth's personality that Ruth herself probably wouldn't have seen anything particularly special about her life as well. And it seems as though the story of Ruth is almost like a drop of water in the ocean of history. But there is something special about Ruth that we know as readers, right? Because we've got some extra information as we look at Scripture. And some of the things we know about Ruth's story, she would have had no idea about. That special thing about Ruth is that she is part of this trajectory, this path in the Old Testament that leads us to Jesus. In fact, the book of Ruth ends with a genealogy. We'll see it next week. A signpost, as it were, pointing us down the path. And so the book of Ruth is significant because there's this signpost that's been placed in Ruth's life that points us in the direction of Jesus. Reading through the Old Testament, if you read through it page by page, front to back, it's almost as if you get this feeling going through the Old Testament as you get into the book of Judges, that it feels like we've lost our way a bit. The world feels like it's sort of falling apart in the book of Judges. And then we meet this lady called Ruth. And she says, basically with her life, with her story, the path is over here. Here's where you need to go. She's a signpost for us. And as we think about our own time period, right now, the current day, our own culture and setting, as we think about possibly even our own lives and our stories, maybe we can sense that we've maybe lost our way a bit. Just like the Judges, the world maybe even seems like it's falling apart again. And here comes this lady named Ruth today. And she says, the path is over here. This is where you need to go. And so Ruth and her story is like a landmark on the map of the Old Testament. And it's this critical element about Ruth's story. The thing that puts her on the map is that the story of Ruth reveals what a redeemer is. What a redeemer is. It's God's answer to the book of Judges, the chaos, the destruction, the famine in the land. It's this idea of a redeemer. It's his response. And basically, a redeemer is a person who pays the cost to put the world back together again. Next week in chapter 4 of Ruth, we're going to hear more and find out more what a redeemer is. But I just wanted to give you a little bit of a foundation there because you're going to hear about one in this chapter 3. And so as we think about what a redeemer is, the redeemer is a person who pays the cost to put the world back together again. That's literally what the word redeem entails, right? So like Webster's dictionary, if you were to look up the word to redeem, the first definition in there would be to buy back, or to repair, to restore. A redeemer is a person who pays the cost and makes the repairs and restoration. So a quick example, if we're thinking about what a redeemer is, the Bible actually gives us some definitions, some examples before the book of Ruth. There's actually quite a few examples in the book of Leviticus. I'll put the passage up on the screens, but in Leviticus 25, verses 47 through 48, it gives us an example, an illustration to help us understand what a redeemer is. And it says the following: if a foreigner resides among you, becomes rich, and any of your fellow Israelites becomes poor, and sell themselves to the foreigner or to a member of the foreigner's clan, they retain the right of redemption after they have sold themselves. One of their relatives may redeem them. So there's this law in Leviticus, right? And it's helping us understand what a redeemer is. And basically the illustration here with this passage is it's talking about if you become poor, say there's a famine in the land and you lose everything, right? And you sell yourself into lifetime servitude. You sell yourself into slavery. There always stands the right of redemption. And this idea of redemption, that right of redemption, means that your brother or your sister could come along and purchase your life back out of slavery. Always. You always have that hope there. And the person who was your slave master cannot say no, right? They cannot deny that right to be redeemed. They might set the price at a ridiculous level, right? They might say it's this huge fee, but you can always be bought back, redeemed, restored. The cost might be ridiculous, but your brother always has the ability, the opportunity to buy you back. Okay, so the story of Ruth reveals what a redeemer is firsthand for us. And we're starting to get a picture of what a redeemer entails, what that word means. And as we think about Ruth, we're going to dive into chapter 3, but before we get in there, one of the things I want to mention is that Ruth kind of has this theme, this motif, this setting of agriculture. That's why we got this stuff up on the stage, right? And the book starts with this famine in the land, and it's sort of paralleled with like a moral and a spiritual and a cultural famine that's going on, an everything famine. The world's sort of broken, but there's a hope. A candle lights up in the darkness. In the midst of the time of famine, the harvest was beginning. There's this opportunity here. And in chapter 2, we heard a little bit about that last week. And now we're in chapter 3, and the harvest is almost over. The harvest is almost finished. There is a restoration about to take place, and we're going to hear about it in chapter 3. So in a moment when we're going to read chapter 3 together, a lot is going to happen in this chapter. We're going to read through the whole thing. And I bet by the end of it, you might be confused by some of the things we're going to read in this chapter. Out of all the 4 chapters of Ruth, this is probably the most confusing section of the book. And so what we're going to do after we read through chapter 3 is we're just going to debrief. We're going to debrief chapter 3 and try to get an understanding of what exactly is happening in this story. And after that debrief, our heart will be ready. We'll be able to see the actual heart of chapter 3, the heart of this part of the story. So we're going to read the chapter, debrief, It'll reveal to us the heart of the chapter, and then we're going to draw some practical applications from it. See how this chapter speaks into our lives. So let's dive in and read chapter 3. And I am actually going to start reading at the very last verse of chapter 2, because it's the transition verse that brings us into chapter 3, that phrase leading into chapter 3. So chapter 2, verse 23 said, "So Ruth stayed close to the woman of Boaz, to glean until the barley and wheat harvests were finished. And she lived with her mother-in-law." Now, chapter 3. One day, Ruth's mother-in-law, Naomi, said to her, "My daughter, I must find a home for you, where you will be well provided for. Now, Boaz, with whose women you have worked, is a relative of ours. Tonight, he will be winnowing barley on the threshing floor. Wash, put on perfume, and get dressed in your best clothes. Then go down to the threshing floor. But don't let him know you are there until he has finished eating and drinking. When he lies down, take note of the place where he is lying. Then go and uncover his feet and lie down. He will tell you what to do." "I will do whatever you say," Ruth answered. So she went down to the threshing floor and did everything her mother-in-law told her to do. Verse 7, when Boaz had finished eating and drinking and was in good spirits, he went over to lie down at the far end of the grain pile. Ruth approached quietly, uncovered his feet, and lay down. In the middle of the night, something startled the man. He turned, and there was a woman lying at his feet. "Who are you?" he asked. "I am your servant Ruth," she said. "Spread the corner of your garment over me, since you are a guardian redeemer of our family." "The Lord bless you, my daughter," he replied. "This kindness is greater than that which you showed earlier. You have not run after the younger men, whether rich or poor. And now, my daughter, don't be afraid. I will do for you all you ask. All the people of my town know that you are a woman of noble character. Although it is true that I am a guardian redeemer of our family, there is another who is more closely related than I. Stay here for the night. In the morning, if he wants to do his duty as your guardian redeemer, good. Let him redeem you. But if he is not willing, as surely as the Lord lives, I will do it. Lie here until morning." So she lay at his feet until morning, but got up before anyone could be recognized. And he said, "No one must know that a woman came to the threshing floor." He also said, "Bring me the shawl you're wearing and hold it out." When she did so, he poured into it 6 measures of barley and placed the bundle on her. Then he went back to town. When Ruth came to her mother-in-law, Naomi asked her, "How did it go, my daughter?" Then she told her everything Boaz had done for her and added, "He gave me 6 measures of barley, saying, 'Don't go back to your mother-in-law empty-handed.'" Then Naomi said, "Wait, my daughter, until you find out what happens, for the man will not rest until the matter is settled today." So chapter 3 of Ruth, probably the most confusing of the 4 chapters of this book. So let's just start by debriefing the story. What is it we just read? Because chapter 3 of Ruth has some intrigue and some controversy. But it's not the controversy many of us are assuming right now. So let me explain a little bit. Some of the controversy. Maybe the controversy we have in our minds and think about is probably something along the lines that's maybe sexual that's going on here. Like, what exactly? Is there something between the lines that just happened in the book of Ruth? Because in our culture, when a lady gets all prettied up, right, and then goes to meet a fella at night at his bed, that sounds like a front page scandal, right? But that's why we need to debrief. We're misunderstanding the subtle cultural cues in this story. So for example, one of the cultural cues we're maybe misinterpreting is the one where Ruth gets all prettied up, right? Because there are examples in Scripture of ladies changing their appearance in order to seduce men. There's multiple examples in Scripture of that happening, but not one of those examples sounds like this. None of them sound like this. In fact, there are nearly identical, word for word, exact representations of this passage and the command that Naomi gives to Ruth, right? Those three things about changing her appearance, those things do happen in Scripture, but none of them involve seducing people. They have to do instead with mourning. With mourning. So, for example, you will hear the same words we just read in Ruth being used to describe King David after he lost his child. And he's been mourning, losing his youngest child, the death of his son. But when David's season of mourning is over, we hear in, for example, 2 Samuel, verse 12 through 20, it talks about how King David washed, anointed himself with perfume, and put on new clothes. It's actually the exact same pattern and phrasing as Ruth, right? Exactly what Ruth's doing. Exactly what Naomi commanded Ruth to do. See, it's as if Ruth has been going around everywhere she went, and it's almost like we could picture her wearing all black, right? Mourning the death of her husband. And Naomi instructs her to end the season of mourning. End the season of mourning. If we think Ruth is trying to get prettied up to seduce Boaz, that doesn't even actually make sense logically in the passage, right? Because it's the dead of night. Boaz can't even see her. Who's there, right? He can't see. It's dark. So why is she getting prettied up, putting new clothes on and stuff like that if he can't even see her? See, this passage, as we think about what it is Naomi's instructing Ruth to do, really, it's to end her season of mourning. And we see examples of that through Scripture. And let me just kind of be a little honest with you. The Hebrew language is often quite crass, right? It can be a little vulgar sometimes. If in Hebrew you want to say so-and-so had like sex with so-and-so, they just say it. There are sometimes innuendos, but for the most part, if you've ever read through like Song of Songs or any of those, like there's enough in there to make you blush, right? It would make me blush, right up here. Hebrew can spell things out quite clearly. They don't need to use innuendos. There's not a necessity to be reading between the lines. And from Boaz's response to this scene, what just happened? Her coming at night and undoing the feet, like what's going on there? The whole uncovering the feet is not even really intended to symbolize some seductive innuendo. And we can tell that because of the way that Boaz responds to it, right? How does Boaz interpret this event? Well, it says in verse 11, and now, my daughter, don't be afraid. I will do for you all you ask. All the people of my town know that you are a woman of noble character. The woman of noble character. Boaz calls Ruth this woman of noble character. And that's a prestigious title. That title only appears in the book of Proverbs. Ruth is the only woman in the entire Bible that gets that title associated with her. Pretty prestigious. And as you look at Proverbs, the end of the book of Proverbs, Proverbs 31, it explains to us what this noble woman is, what this title is. And it says things like, a wife of noble character, who can find? She is worth far more than rubies. Her husband has full confidence in her and lacks nothing of value. She brings him good and not harm all the days of her life. She gets up while it is still night. She provides food for her family. Her children arise and call her blessed. Her husband also, and he praises her. Many women do noble things, but you surpass them all. And then when Boaz wakes up and finds Ruth, he says, the Lord bless you, my daughter. You are the woman of noble character. Wow, I found you. And Ruth is the only woman in all of the Bible outside of Proverbs that gets called that. And so as we think about the controversy, man, in Boaz's mind, the way he's interpreting what he's saying this is the woman of noble character. But there is a controversy happening in this passage. Although it's not something sexual going on here, an innuendo, as it were, the controversy is something different. And this is one of those ones where a famous scholar named Daniel Block, a famous Old Testament scholar from Wheaton University, he wrote commentaries on Ruth. He says the following with Naomi's instructions to Ruth. He says, there is no suggestion in Naomi's tone or intention that either verb is to be interpreted sexually. So he says there's not even a suggestion that that's what the author is trying to communicate to us. So that leaves us with the same question, though. What exactly is going on here, right? Why is Ruth approaching at nighttime? And it's because there is a controversy. Although it's not sexual in nature, as we might have assumed, the controversy instead is almost everything else, right? The controversy is like every other word in this passage. The controversy in this passage is ethnic. The controversy in this passage is social structures. The controversy is inheritance. The controversy is financial. There is controversy all over the place in this passage. I mean, just realize that Ruth is a Moabite woman. She's essentially a woman, an enemy nation woman. And Boaz is this master, and Ruth is the servant. And so there's this weird dynamic. This is not the way things should go, where the servant proposes to the master, or even culturally, where the woman proposes to the man. She is claiming the right of redemption even, which means Boaz is the one who's going to pay for her deliverance. So the controversy in Ruth's proposal of marriage to Boaz, and that's what she's doing. She's proposing marriage to him. This proposal goes against almost every single cultural and societal norm of that time period. There is sort of a scandal going on here. The cultural norm, if what we expected to happen were to happen in this time period, the response to Ruth would have been something along these lines. Get away from me, Moabite slave girl. I won't pay to set you free. You have no rights and no value here. Like that's the cultural norm. And so Ruth approaches Boaz, right? And it's risky. This is a risky proposition she's making. Her proposal may very well insult his honor. In broad daylight, if she was to approach him and say these words, everyone around would just start laughing, right? That's so ridiculous. And so she approaches in the dead of night. And there is something special going on here with how Ruth's proposal to Boaz is shaped in this passage with the whole uncovering of the feet thing. And the literal translation of verse 9 is a little clearer and a little bit better captured by the English Standard Version. I read for you the New International Version, but the English Standard Version captures what's happening in verse 9 with Ruth's request of Boaz. And I'll read it for you. We'll have it on the screen too so you can see that other translation. Boaz, said, "Who are you?" And she, Ruth, answered, "I am Ruth, your servant. Spread your wings over your servant, for you are a redeemer." Spread your wing over your servant, for you are a redeemer. And that phrase that she's using there is alluding back to something Boaz said in chapter 2, right? In chapter 2, I'll throw it on the screen for you too, as well. Ruth chapter 2, verse 12, Boaz made a blessing. He he had this blessing that he proclaimed over Ruth. And these are some of the words of the blessing he used. May the Lord repay you for what you have done. May you be richly rewarded by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge. It's part of his blessing. And so Ruth's wedding proposal to Boaz, she's basically saying, you are the one, Boaz, through which that blessing you proclaimed, it's going to happen. You are the one through which that blessing will be fulfilled. And that Hebrew phrase, that literal phrase that's used there, spread your wings over me, right? The reason why that's kind of a marriage proposal, that's a phrase that's used for a marriage proposal, is, and it's a cultural idiom of Hebrew. And the way it's translated in that NIV is, spread the corner of your garment over me, because it's sort of this picture of like a wing going over, right, a person. And the picture that they would have in mind when they would use this phrase, when they're talking about marriage or a marriage proposal, is they would picture a woman out in the cold, shivering out in the cold, the rain, the elements. And there's this visual picture with this Hebrew phrase that woman is shivering out in the cold, and the guy comes and drapes the corner of his cloak over her. And it's this visual picture they would have of what marriage entails. It's this symbol that man is vowing to protect and care for and provide for that woman. She'll never be cold again. And so this cultural Hebrew idiom, right, helps us understand what exactly is happening in this passage. Why it is that Boaz wakes up in the middle of the night suddenly, right? His feet are uncovered. He's probably freezing. It gets cold at night, just like here. He's shivering because his feet are uncovered. And he starts to feel around in the cold, in the dark, for where his blanket is, right? And there he finds a woman shivering in the cold, Ruth. And Ruth captures this Jewish idiom for all its worth when she says, spread the corner of your garment over me. Spread your wings over your servant, since you are a guardian redeemer of our family. And so, yes, this passage has controversy. But as we've debriefed the passage, we're realizing there is something really beautiful being captured in this passage and communicated to us. And we're beginning to recognize the heart of this passage. The heart of this passage. See, this passage demonstrates for us what it's like to approach a redeemer. What it's like to approach a redeemer. And approaching a redeemer, there's almost these little phases that we could break it down and understand it by. Approaching a redeemer, it kind of started with this first phase with Ruth, where there is this heart shift that starts to happen. A heart shift. There's a moment where our heart knows what needs to happen. Ruth has this heart shift from a season of mourning to a new season of life. She changes even her outward appearance, but really it's an indication that there's a heart transition happening, right? Because approaching a redeemer begins with our heart knowing something needs to change in our life. Something needs to change. But, right? And this kind of brings us into the second phase of one of the things that's happening in this passage, because this thing that needs to change, in order for it to change, it almost seems improper, right? It felt awkward for Ruth to approach Boaz, a servant approaching the master, an outsider approaching the kinsman, the undeserving approaching the man of honor, the lesser approaching the greater. There's this hesitation, the seemingly improper. And in that process of Ruth approaching Boaz, it brings us to this other phase that's happening in here. And it's admitting weakness. It's admitting being vulnerable. Admitting weakness. Ruth uncovers Boaz's feet so that he would reach out and see that she is that woman out in the cold. Ruth, even approaching Boaz, is breaking all the cultural norms, and she does so out of desperation, right? I cannot make it on my own. Ruth says, I need to be redeemed. I need to be bought back. I have to be redeemed, restored. It's the only way. I need a redeemer. And that leads us to what Ruth's request was. Verse 9 said, I am Ruth, your servant. Spread your wings over your servant, for you are a redeemer. It doesn't get any more straightforward or beautiful than that. So as we're thinking about approaching a redeemer, it began with kind of that heart shift where she realized something needs to change, but that something, in order to happen, it almost seems improper. It means vulnerability, admitting my weaknesses and making a big request. And the last phase of what we see in this chapter is faith and trust. In verse 18, it says, Then Naomi said, Wait, my daughter, until you find out what happens, for the man will not rest until the matter is settled today. There's actually an anticipation of transformation that goes along with that faith and trust that encompasses approaching a redeemer. And verse 16, right before what we just read, it can actually be a bit confusing in the original Hebrew. It says in the NIV, when Ruth came to her mother-in-law Naomi, Naomi asked, How did it go, my daughter? And that translation kind of helps us understand what's happening, but verse 16 is actually really confusing in the original Hebrew. Because like the literal wooden translation of what Naomi says to Ruth is the following. Who are you, my daughter? Who are you, my daughter? What? Right? Kind of confusing. Wait, why is Naomi asking Ruth who she is if she already knows she's her daughter that she's talking to, right? Who are you, my daughter? See, Naomi is anticipating a transformation in Ruth's identity. She is anticipating Ruth to return different. Ruth, the widow, the daughter of the famine, she's anticipating her to return as Ruth the redeemed, the wife of Boaz. And so this chapter ends with this sense of faith and trust and anticipation of this transformation taking place. Now let's take the heart of this chapter. This chapter is revealing to us what approaching a redeemer entails, a demonstration for us, a visual picture for us. Now let's take the heart of this chapter and see how it applies to our lives. Maybe this morning you've found yourself at a point in your life where your heart knows something needs to change. Approaching a redeemer begins with our heart knowing something needs to change. Something needs to change. But sometimes we get caught up, right? We get caught up in the seemingly improper, right? We maybe say things like, I know I need Jesus to be a part of my life, but, right? My life is a mess. I need to get things under control before I can approach Jesus. I need to get this sorted out first. I need ... But, fill in the blank. Approaching a redeemer means the undeserving is approaching the man of honor. The lesser is approaching the greater. It means vulnerability. because there is a moment in our life where we realize, I can't make it on my own. I can't make it on my own. Just like Ruth, we realize, I need to be redeemed. I need to be bought back. I need to be restored. I need a redeemer. If that's where you are at right now, in this moment, I'm going to lead a prayer in a moment. And that prayer, I invite you to join with me. That is a prayer to ask Jesus to be your redeemer. Even if you're a person who says, man, I already know that Jesus is my redeemer and savior, that's already a part of my life, this prayer can be a powerful reminder for you. I'd invite you to maybe say some of these words with us. Because, man, I do a lot of weddings. I get to be a part of a lot of weddings, and I hear a lot of brides and grooms give their wedding vows right in front of me. And every time I hear it, it reminds me back to the vows that I made. So this is a time that if you already know Jesus as your Redeemer and Savior, I would invite you, this is a mini reminder, a little renewal of your vows moment. So would you pray with us now? And if you would like to request Jesus to be your Redeemer, Ruth shows you how. And this is that moment. Let's pray. Father, in our heart, maybe we know something needs to change. Maybe we've tried to make changes. Maybe things are a mess and we just can't seem to fix it. And there is something we're maybe reluctant. It's seemingly improper to come to you so messy. The lesser coming to the greater. But there's a moment in our life where we just come to the realization, you know what? I need a Redeemer. That's what I need. If that is where you're at in this room right now, in a moment here, I'm going to use my own name, but I want you to recite with me that phrase that Ruth uses. I am, and whatever your name, your servant. I am, fill in your name, your servant. Spread your wings over your servant, for you are a Redeemer, Jesus. I invite you to pray that with me. I am Michael, your servant. Spread your wings over your servant, for you are a Redeemer, Jesus. And it doesn't get any more straightforward or more beautiful than that. And Jesus, we know that you did not rest and you will not rest until the matter is settled today. And we are your redeemed, bought back with your very life. So thank you. Amen. If you prayed that with me, maybe you prayed that for the first time, I would just encourage you, man, fill out something. Fill out one of those I'm new here cards or a prayer request, or just drop me a note or something like that, because I would love to reach out to you this week. And if you see my number pop up, we're going to be talking about baptism. I'd love to tell you more about baptism. So if you prayed that prayer for the first time, please reach out to me. Maybe you prayed it for a whole new time in your life. Please reach out for me. Next week is the final week of this series. And we are going to see firsthand exactly what a redeemer is. This week we sort of saw the redeemed, right? And how she approached the redeemer. But next week you get the beautiful master painting. The whole book comes to its climax and you get to see what a redeemer is. And you'll also see the true cost of Ruth's redemption. I know many of us have maybe read through this book before, but there's maybe something you never realized about this book. And it has to do with the stipulations of Jewish levirate marriage. We're going to talk about it next week. But a person from the ancient Near East, watching this story play out, reading through this story, they would recognize the true cost of Ruth's redemption. It's the death of Boaz. Boaz's name becomes blotted out in order to redeem Ruth. That's the cost. And we're going to see that next week and exactly what that means and entails. Would you stand with us now for a closing song?